Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. It is so hard to believe that half of 2019 is already over. We have come to the point where it's time for me to think about what were some of my favorite reads so far this year. I did not narrow it down to one favorite read. I have 5 books here that I want to tell you about today that I absolutely have loved this year. It has really overall been such a great reading year. And I will be talking more specifics about my reading year in other videos. Today, I just want to tell you about the top 5 books that I've read so far in 2019. I did not rank these in any kind of an order. I just went through my Goodreads list of what I read this year and picked 5 that jumped out at me. Books that I've thought about beyond the time when I was reading them. Books that I just have absolutely loved. And in a way, they all have a historical aspect to them. I have no contemporaries in here, no thrillers in here. They are all a little bit historical or outright historical. But they're not all World War II historical fiction, which kind of surprised me. I thought I'd have more of them, but I do have one. I read this, I think, in January as a buddy read with Laura, a friend of mine from Instagram. And we read Georgia Hunter's We Were the Lucky Ones. This book I heard about first on Anne Bogel's podcast, What Should I Read Next? She was on her podcast with Georgia Hunter, the author. And so I learned about this book, which is based on Georgia Hunter's family. It is fictionalized. However, the main events and a lot of the events that happened from here are factual. They did really happen to her family, and it's her grandparents' generation. So her grandfather and his wife and siblings, so great aunts and great uncles. This is the story of how this Kirk family all survive World War II, which is phenomenal. It takes place all over Europe and even into, I believe, Brazil. We're all over Europe in this book, as well as even into South America. However, it just was such a beautiful story of this family. We follow the timeline from 1939 through the war till after the war, and we follow the different, the parents. I forget names. As much as the story sticks with me, I don't remember the names. Let me see, there's a family tree at the beginning, which was super helpful in the book. So we follow the parents of the Kirk family, Saul and Nachuma, and it's a Jewish family, and Saul and Nachuma have 5 children, and so we follow all of them throughout the war and the different places that they get taken and the different choices that they make. This was a fantastic World War II historical novel. I did give it 5 stars. There was one aspect of things that I didn't like. Every once in a while, we kind of jumped. Well, I mean, because we're going from perspective to perspective, it felt a little bit choppy at times. However, overall, I absolutely loved this book and would highly recommend this for a World War II historical fiction. Another historical fiction that I read, but was totally different, is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. This follows Sayuri. Look at that, I even remembered her name. We follow this young girl as she's taken from her family, ripped from her sister, and then placed into a home where she eventually becomes a geisha. And we follow her throughout the course of decades as she learns and grows. She gets an older mentor geisha who teaches her about the art of being a geisha. It was beautiful, set in Japan, obviously. Just learned a lot about the culture at the time and also about what it was to be a geisha. There was drama between other geisha and her. But it was a captivating story. And I also buddy read this book. I feel like there's going to be a theme of that with these books. But yeah, this was a fantastic read. I had a feeling, based on so many other people who have said that they loved it, I had a feeling that I was going to love it, and absolutely was a 5-star read and one that I have thought about a lot after reading. So I'm thrilled that I read this one. During middle grade March, I read this one in March, and it's Sweep, The Story of a Girl and Her Monster by Jonathan Auxier. This was the group read that Katie and I chose for middle grade March, and I believe just about everybody loved this book. We're in Victorian London with a young girl, Nan, who is a chimney sweep's helper. She's a climber, which is an odd job for a young girl. Usually it is a young boy's job, but we learn a lot about Victorian London and what it's like for chimney sweeps at the time. The horrible things that young children had to do. And sometimes they were earning money for their families. Sometimes they were kidnapped and taken away from their families. The conditions that they had to live in. But we follow Nan as she is reflecting back on her time with a chimney sweep who taught her the ropes. And then as she moves forward, she's separated from him, or he disappears. One day a bully traps her in a crawl space. She manages to escape, but escaping with her is a golem. And she kind of raises this golem from a small coal into this monster. And so we learn about Jewish history at the time and Jewish folklore, because a golem comes from Jewish folklore. We also learn about Victorian London. It's just also such a heartwarming and uplifting tale as Nan kind of comes into her own. At the beginning, she's very content to be by herself and isolates herself, but by the end, she grows in a lot of different ways, and it's just lovely. I really want to read more from this author, but I absolutely loved this book, and it was by far one of my favorites of the year so far. Another book that I absolutely loved, which was no surprise to me, was Kristen Hanna's The Great Alone. I absolutely loved this book, as I've loved just about every Kristen Hanna book that I've read. This was a pretty sad and almost not dark book, but sometimes literally dark. It takes place in Alaska in the 1970s, and we follow this family, Lenny and her parents, who moved to Alaska. Her father fought in the Vietnam War, I want to say. In the 70s, right? He was a former prisoner of war, comes home, and he's so changed from the war, but I think some of his abusive tendencies were there before the war, but coming back highlights all of these tendencies that he has. But he and his family moved to Alaska to try to have a fresh start, and so they moved to this land that's pretty brutal, and they have no clue of what they're getting into. Lenny absolutely falls in love with Alaska. In Alaska, the setting was so strong and such an active part of this story. But we have this tale of this family with an abusive husband, a mother who is trapped in an abusive relationship but loves her husband, and then Lenny, the teenage daughter, who wants to escape but also loves the place that they've landed. So it's a very sad, somewhat grim book. There are some fantastic characters that they meet once they're in Alaska. I just love the way Kristen Hanna tells a story, and definitely had me from the first chapter, had me captivated, and I was, of course, sobbing at different points throughout this tale. Love, 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 love Kristen Hanna. And finally, a book that I just finished, I haven't even wrapped it up yet, is Hum If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Marais. I don't know if I'm saying her last name right. I still need to look up how that's pronounced, but if you know, I feel like it's Bianca Marais or Marais. I don't know. She is a South African, and this is a book about apartheid South Africa, and we follow two main characters. We follow Beauty, who is a black woman who travels to Johannesburg and Soweto, the black village outside of Johannesburg, to find her daughter, who had gone to live with an uncle for school, and her uncle sent Beauty a note. Beauty's brother sent her a note saying that her daughter was in trouble and needed her to come. We also follow a young girl named Robin, who is a white girl living in Johannesburg, whose parents both are killed very early on in the book, and she goes to live with an aunt. These two women's lives intersect, and really this is a story about we get the historical aspect of the Soweto uprising and how horrible that was, a group of children marching and police opening fire on these kids. But there's much more to it than that, which is awful enough. But then we also just are seeing Robin as she grows. The racism in this book is outrageous, and her parents were absolutely a part of that in the way that they spoke about and to Black people around Robin. And so she has all of these ideas of race and what it means to be different, but as her life totally changes, she begins to question these things and learns a different way of things. And it's so beautiful to see her grow and change in that as a young girl. She's 9, 10, 11 years old throughout this book. So she's quite young. It was wonderful to see her worldview change throughout this book. Besides being a fabulous story or tale about these two women, I really connected with the way that this was written. I have so many little tabs, it's hard to see them. I really enjoyed just the way that Bianca Murray wrote this book. There was quotes to talk about. Oh, I also buddy read this, by the way. There were quotes to talk about and just things that stood out to me about fear, about courage, about bravery, about race, about love, about family. There were so many themes and so many things in this book that just absolutely made me fall in love with it. It's definitely a favorite of the year so far. Probably for the whole year. All of these were just fabulous. So here we have my 5, I'm gonna move over. So here we have my 5 favorites from the year. I would love to hear what you have thought about any of these, if you liked them or not. And also, what was one of your favorite books from this year so far? We're halfway through, guys. Do you have a book that stands out to you as being an absolute must read? I would highly recommend all 5 of these books. There are some pretty strong situations that are in each of them. I mean, in this one we have severe racism and a little bit of brutality, and in this one we have abuse and a sexual abuse scene. This one has some war, and so some of the brutality that comes from war scenes. There's not much that is a trigger warning in this one, but it will grab your heart and twist it a little bit. And then this one has some domestic violence. So there are some pretty hefty topics dealt with in each of these 5 books, but I absolutely loved them, loved how they were written, loved the stories, and they have stayed with me. So that is why they are the top 5 books from my year so far. Yay! Give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it. Please talk with me down in the comments about these books or about any of your favorite books so far from the year. Subscribe if you haven't already and you want to see more from me and some better hair. I can't wait to get my hair colored. It's happening on Tuesday. And I'll be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye.